Hi, welcome to Star Wars and Spicy Summer, where today I'm going to be ranking every single Legends continuity book with the exception of Ruins of Dantooine. So buckle up. First off, I don't know how long this video is going to be, so please bear with me as I go through this. It's taken me a long time to come together with all this stuff, and I'm really excited to do this project finally. But before I begin, there are a few things that I want to explain. I have 6 different categories, ranging from bad to okay to good, really good, excellent, and peak. Because I've just enjoyed so much of the Legends continuity over the years, I kind of had a hard time leveling anything less than okay. I will say that this ranking is completely subjective and based on my understanding and response to these books. It's not a dig at any author. There are going to be some authors that you think maybe I don't care for very much, but trust me, their books are further down the line as well. So we're going to start with bad and work our way to the number 1 spot. And the first one we're going to look at is Star Wars Legacy of the Force Revelation. This is the worst Star Wars book I feel like I've ever read. The complete destruction of Jacen Solo's character was just too much for me to handle. The conclusion of the book, with an infamous encounter between Jacen and some Mandalorians, left me with a bad taste in my mouth, and I just did not care for this book one bit. I've read it a couple times, and I haven't come around to it. So maybe I'll grab it again someday, but not on the top of my reading list. Next up, at 158, we have Sacrifice, Legacy of the Force. Again, I just didn't like the direction that they were taking Jacen with Darth Caedus. Now, don't get me wrong, I think that you could have done a very good story about Jacen falling to the dark side. And I think that was set up excellently at the beginning of the series, but the execution of it just left a lot to be desired for me. And this is where I feel like the Legacy of the Force really started to come off the rails, and you could see the differences between the authors and their pet characters and everything like that. So, unfortunately, I have to rate Sacrifice as number 158. Number 157, we have the Bounty Hunter trilogy, beginning with the Mandalorian armor. The writing style for this book just did not gel with me. I mean, there's a couple things that stood out to me, like there's a character who has a cannon for the head, which is kind of cool, but we don't get to do very much with him. So this book left me feeling flat. Followed by its sequel, Slave Ship, which I really can't remember a lot from this book. I do remember I thought that it picked up a little bit on the writing from the first book, but overall, not a lot of memorable things happened in this. The 2 timelines, I think I would have been more interested in just sticking with the timeline before Boba Fett went into the Sarlacc or the timeline after Boba Fett went into the Sarlacc, but it just didn't mesh well for me. Which brings us to the next one, final one in the trilogy, Hard Merchandise. And don't get me wrong, I love bounty hunters. I think there's some really great stories out there, including stories about Boba Fett. I like Boba Fett as a character a lot, but I just didn't feel like these stories did much, because one of the things that really, really annoyed me about this entire trilogy is you had this guy whose name was Cat. Well, Kuat, but back then I pronounced it as Cat. And he was from Cat. And he happened to have a phalanx, which is a cat. So, cat, cat, cat. And it just got repetitive and a little bit annoying. But I have several other books about Boba Fett that rank a lot higher than this on this list. Star Wars Imperial Commando 501st. This book just didn't go anywhere. I thought there were some interesting plot points that were left after the preceding book, but it really went nowhere. There's an entire subplot where one of the main characters is tracking down members of Death Watch, and it just keeps going on and on and on. And I just felt like there was no real resolution to this. Some of the decisions the characters were making didn't feel like they were in character to me. So this one falls at number 154. At number 153, we have Order 66. Now, don't get me wrong. I have nothing against Karen Traviss. There's some of her books that I've read that I've really, really, really enjoyed. But this book, I was moving with it, enjoying it, until it got to the end, when there was an event that takes place, climactic event that takes place, and I just did not feel like it was executed very well, which left me cold on this book in general. But again, there's a lot of this series that I do enjoy. So at 152, we have the Star Wars book Crucible by Troy Denning. It did not feel like a complete ending to me. He went way too far this time with his desire to torture the main characters. He alluded to cutting off Han's ear in one of the Dark Nest books. I believe it was The Unseen Queen. And then we have it actually take place in this book. Han loses an eye. Like, there's just some stuff in here that just seemed really edgy for the sake of edginess, and I really didn't care for it. Following up on 151, we have Star Wars The Old Republic Annihilation. This book had a lot of potential in my mind. You have a non-Force sensitive child of a Jedi Grand Master who doesn't have access to the Force, but this story had basically been told in an Old Republic comic book storyline previous to this, and it just didn't have enough action and compelling characters to make it feel like a worthwhile read. I've tried to go back and reread it in the years after, and it just hasn't done anything for me. At number 150, we have Star Wars Shield of Lies. This book is broken into 3 distinct parts: a part about Leia, a part about Luke, and a part about Lando. And they're not interspersed together. It just follows each of those characters through a chunk of the book, and then it drops their plot lines moving forward. I did not like the flow of this book. I know a lot of people like the story about Lobot and Lando, and don't get me wrong, I love those characters, but this did not gel with me. I found this book very boring. It didn't leave a lot to drag me back for a reread. So this one is definitely at 150. At 149, we have Star Wars Planet of Twilight. This is the end of the Callista trilogy, and definitely the worst, or the weakest book, I should say, in the entire Callista trilogy. Luke goes after her, trying to find her after she leaves, following the events of Darksaber, which I believe is a much better book. And it just... Leia finds some Hutt smut, which is just weird, and then she fights a Hutt Jedi, which sounds cool on the surface of it, but it's just too little too late in this book to really redeem it in my eyes. And then at 148, we have the first book in the Callista trilogy, Children of the Jedi. I ranked this one a little bit higher because I found it interesting. Luke discovering Callista's memories in the Eye of Palpatine, but the stuff with Leia and her storyline didn't feel like it was going anywhere for me. And in the end, I thought it was really weird that one of Luke's students sacrificed herself so that Callista could inhabit her body so that she could be with Luke. That was just really weird. Didn't feel like Star Wars to me. So that one ranks pretty low. That's the end of my bad category. Now on to my okay category. Starting with Star Wars The Crystal Star. This book gets a lot of heat for not being very good, but I thought it was a fun romp. You really get to know the kids, Jason, Jaina, and Anakin, and we get to see them developing as individuals. I thought the plot line of Luke going out and looking for additional Jedi and getting pulled into the plot of Waru was entertaining. Just not as bad as what people would lead you to believe. I had some fun with it, so don't skip on this one. At 146, we have Death Star. Death Star is an interesting book for me. I thought it was kind of cool when it was starting off and they were talking about the construction of the Death Star, but then that plot point just kind of drops when we pick up several months later on the Death Star. And then, conveniently, all of our main characters are just outside of the screen when it comes to the events of A New Hope. In the conclusion, I think it could have used a little bit more punch. But overall, this was an okay book. I didn't like it. I didn't hate it, but it was an okay read. Star Wars Death Troopers, on the other hand, I felt was an interesting premise, but it failed in the execution a little bit for me. I've read it a couple times. It's not super scary, which is okay by me. I don't like a lot of scary stuff, but it just didn't feel like it pushed far enough. And when they introduced Han and Chewie into the scenario, then it definitely cuts back on the tension of who's going to make it and who's not going to make it because they've got plot armor for days. So Death Troopers is my number 145. At number 144, I have the book Star Wars Riptide. It's this fella right here. And I thought Crosscurrent did a better job of handling the character of Jaden Korr. It does have an interesting twist towards the end, but I just feel like they could have done more with it. It feels like the middle book of a trilogy, which we never saw completed, which makes that a lower ranking in my opinion because there were interesting plot points that were left dangling, but didn't really go anywhere. Following that, at number 143 is Star Wars Crosscurrent. I'm a big fan of Jaden Korr. If you haven't, you need to play Star Wars Jedi Knight, Jedi Academy. It is one of the best Star Wars experiences you'll have in a video game. I know it's old school, but I played so much of that game when I was younger. Crosscurrent picks up with Jaden Korr. He's on a mission to the unknown regions after a climactic event takes place in the Legacy of the Force series. I thought it was really intriguing to see what Jaden was up to. I did not particularly care for the time travel plot, which brought an Old Republic ship to the modern day, and it just didn't feel like those two things meshed very well, and it took up a large chunk of the middle part of the book, which I would have been more interested in having some time with Jaden and the crew that he winds up with. So Crosscurrent winds up at my number 143. At number 142, we have Star Wars Before the Storm. This is the first book in the Black Fleet Crisis, which is followed up by Shield of Lies and finally by Tyrant's Test. This set up a pretty interesting series in my mind, where the New Republic is established as the government and then they're seen as, like, for lack of a better term, bullying a smaller civilization into joining the Republic. Luke sets off on a quest to find his mother, which was really an interesting plot idea. I just thought that there was a lot of cool ideas that were set up in this book that were not executed on in the next book, which unfortunately reduced the rating of this one in my eyes. Following that, we've got Showdown at Center Point. This is the conclusion of the Corellian trilogy. The whole Corellian trilogy sets up some really important lore for the rest of the Star Wars expanded universe, but it just feels kind of empty to me. This one, as the conclusion, we get to see more of the kids as individuals. Anakin gets a connection with Centerpoint Station, which is followed up later in the New Jedi Order and Legacy of the Force. But overall, the Corellian trilogy with Crisis at Showdown at Center Point, Assault at Salonia, and Ambush at Corellia didn't do a lot for me. Again, it sets up a lot of great lore that is expanded on later on in the EU, or Legends continuity as it's called now, like Thraken Sal Solo and the Center Point Station and how important Corellia is and all of this, but it just didn't do much for me. Following the Corellian trilogy, we have the Lando Calrissian Adventures. It's this fella right there. And Lando's such a cool character. I just feel like he should have had a series for himself that really demonstrated that. I know there are people that love these books to death. They just felt a little too wonky for me. It didn't feel like Star Wars enough. So I haven't gone back and reread those as much as I've gone back and reread the Han Solo Adventures. But, you know, they were entertaining enough, but I definitely haven't put them back into my reread rotation. Next we have The New Rebellion. This book I actually like quite a bit, and I want to get back into my reading rotation. There are some really cool things that take place, setting up expanded lore for the Young Jedi Knight series with Brachus. I thought that Cooler, if that's how you say that right, I thought that was an interesting character, and the conclusion was intriguing there. The whole subplot about Han being blamed for bombing the New Republic Senate, a little far-fetched, but I liked where it went with Smuggler's Run. So this one, I have it listed as okay because I haven't really gone back and reread it, but it's one that I do want to reread at some point in the future. Star Wars Tyrant's Test. This is the concluding book of the Black Fleet Crisis. And this one, I feel like it was the strongest of all three of the novels. The part where the Wookiees went and rescued Han Solo from captivity was a lot of fun. I liked the way that Luke and the Falanasi, is that right? Yeah, Falanasi come up with a solution to the whole Black Fleet crisis. And what happens to the bad guy, I thought was pretty creative. So this one was okay. Now, I mentioned before that I'm not going to do The Ruins of Tatooine. So to offset that, I put a couple of other books in here that haven't been talked about in other Star Wars Legends reviews. And those are Star Wars Dark Forces. These are kind of like novella comic adaptations almost of the Star Wars Dark Forces series. And this was the only way that I had access to this story when I was a kid. So these have a warm place in my heart. I mean, come on, Kyle Katarn, Chuck Norris of the Star Wars universe, am I right? So we've got Star Wars Dark Forces Jedi Knight, Rebel Agent, and Soldier for the Empire. Where these fall a little bit flat in my mind is it doesn't deal enough with character. Like, they could have driven the plot a little bit more with the character. And the action seemed a little bit light compared to what you probably saw in the video games. So I think there were some restrictions that were hampering the quality of this series overall. But I had fun with it. So if you get a chance to track these down, check out like Better World Books. Those are a lot of fun. Picking up with number 131, I have Tales from the New Republic. Now these are anthology books. They have a bunch of short stories in them. I'm not going to rank each and every story that's in here. But I find that there is a mix of good stories, great stories, and so-so stories. So I kind of ranked all the Tales of books. Tales from the Empire. Tales from Jabba's Palace. Tales from the Mos Eisley Cantina. I ranked them from 131 down to 128. But I do leave number 127 as a special situation because there are a couple of stories in Tales from the Bounty Hunters that I really, really enjoyed. The one about Boba Fett at the end is excellent. the one about IG-88, I thought was a lot of fun, so I rank this one higher than the other two. Following up from there, we have the novelization of The Force Unleashed 2. The game was alright. I had a lot of fun playing it, but it's not super memorable, and the book really didn't do anything to make it stand out to me. It leaves off on a cliffhanger, and it never gets resolved, although we as fans know that it has to be resolved a certain way. Galen Merrick, for me, just not an overly compelling character, just too overpowered, but I had fun reading the book, so I rank it here. Then we've got at 124, we've got Star Wars, The Force Unleashed, the novelization for the first game. And they did some interesting things with this book, but I didn't like the way it ended. There were characters that were involved in the finale of the plot that it just doesn't make sense, would be aware of things that were going on. So I bumped this one down as well. Coming in at 123, we have Star Wars, The Clone Wars, Wild Space. I liked the beginning of this book quite a bit. It deals with the immediate aftermath of the Battle of Geonosis, and this was before we had the book Brotherhood in canon that gives us the official version of the story. But I really liked seeing what it was like for the Jedi after the Battle of Geonosis, what Anakin was going through, what Padme was going through, and Obi-Wan. I really liked that. It ties up with an episode of the Clone Wars, and I'm a big fan of that television show. But the ending is a little bit lackluster in my eyes. It kind of turned into a quest book, and I didn't care for the way the resolution went. But the beginning was strong enough for me to rank it at number 123. At 122, we have Star Wars Clone Wars Gambit Siege, which is this one right here. And it's got some action in it that I think is really great. I like all the interactions that are going on between the main characters. The overarching plot about another bioweapon from the Confederacy of Independent Systems trying to wipe out the clones is a little bit overused at this point. But I did like some of the character beats that went along with it. This one is closely followed by the preceding book of the duology, which is Star Wars Clone Wars Gambit Stealth, which is this one right here. And I rank this one higher than Siege because the opening part of it I thought was a lot stronger. There was a really excellent action set piece that went on with Ahsoka and Rex, and it pulled me into the story a lot more than what I felt like Siege was able to do. Following that, we've got Star Wars Republic Commando, True Colors. And this was an enjoyable book. I liked the heist story that kind of went along with it and the overlap between Omega Squad and Delta Squad. But I think that Travis did a better job with some of her earlier work with the Republic Commando series. So, not a bad read overall. I enjoyed it, but it hasn't made it into my rereading rotation very often. Which leads me to the next one, Star Wars Republic Commando 000. Now this is a science fiction book club hardcover that contains both Hard Contact and 000. And 000 I rank just below True Colors. The espionage plot was interesting, but I didn't find it that engaging. I found espionage plots and things like the Star Wars novels Iron Fist and in Wedge's Gamble to be much more engaging than this one. But it's still overall a pretty fun read. And just wait, Hard Contact's coming back up on the list a little bit later. Following up with that, at number 118, we've got Star Wars The Approaching Storm. This is the official prequel novel to The Attack of the Clones that was released before the movie came out. And it doesn't really gel with a lot of readers. It's by Alan Dean Foster, which has a nice, neat connection to the original Star Wars. He was the ghostwriter for the Star Wars novelization, even though it said it was written by George Lucas. And he was also the author of the first Expanded Universe book, which is Splinter of the Mind's Eye, which we'll get to a little bit later. This book does not have a ton of action in it, and it can work a little slow. There are two characters that start off as being very similar to Jar Jar, and I understand that that can turn some people off. But to me, it's got kind of this meditative quest thing going on for it. And I kind of think about it as almost being like Lord of the Rings for Star Wars. And I know that's probably going to strike a nail or strike a chord with some people. And some people are going to disagree with me on that. But it's got a slower pace. I got to know the characters really well. And it was just interesting to see like Anakin and Obi-Wan, Luminara and Barriss in a different setting. So this one, I have probably a higher ranking of it than most people would, but I still thought it was pretty enjoyable. Now, the next two are probably going to come as a surprise to many loyal readers of the Expanded Universe. I have Darth Bane, Dynasty of Evil. This is the third book in the Darth Bane trilogy, and it deals with Darth Zana and Darth Bane finally coming to terms with succession, and Bane wants Zana to kill him, and then he doesn't, and he's thinking about taking somebody else on. It's a fun story. It has little twists and turns along the way, but it's not the strongest one I felt in the Darth Bane trilogy. At number 116, we have Star Wars Darth Bane Rule of Two. This book picks up closely after the conclusion of Star Wars Jedi vs. Sith, which is something that is also covered in depth in Path of Destruction. And then it has a pretty significant time jump, which I feel like was a wasted opportunity to see Darth Zana as she developed over time to become a powerful Sith apprentice. The plot about one of the Jedi Lord's apprentices tracking down to make sure all the Sith have been wiped out after the climactic battle from Path of Destruction. I found that pretty interesting. I did like the concluding battle that takes place in this book, but it just didn't rise quite to the level of what I was anticipating after having read the very good Star Wars Path of Destruction. At 115, we have Star Wars The Old Republic Fatal Alliance. There's a lot of cool stuff that goes on here. You've got multiple different POV characters. There's a smuggler in here that I found was very interesting and a lot of fun. There's an Imperial, which this is Old Republic Imperial, Sith spy that starts to side more and more with the Republic. One of the things that I did not like about this book, though, was the fact that each chapter would tie into each other, but then it's almost like you're rereading what happened towards the end of the last chapter, setting up how that character got into the exact space, and it just kind of threw the pacing off for me, and I didn't really care for that. But overall, pretty fun read. This follows up with Star Wars Red Harvest. I like this one better than Death Troopers, which this is kind of a prequel to Star Wars Death Troopers. What I like about this is it's the Sith dealing with the origins of the zombie plague, and that's just a lot of fun going on with the story. It's set on a Sith academy, so there's a lot of betrayal, and there's lots of fighting and infighting, and I had a lot of fun with it. So that is my number 114. Following up Star Wars Fatal Alliance, we have Star Wars Revan, an Old Republic novel. This one I was super excited about. Darth Revan, obviously, super cool character you get to engage with in the first Knights of the Old Republic RPG game. had a blast with that game, was super excited to see more of his character, and I was disappointed to see that he was only the focus character for the first half of the book, and then it picks up with Mitra Surik, which I believe is her name, which is the Jedi Exile, and I liked her character too. I had a lot of fun with the game Star Wars Knights of the Old Republic 2, the Sith Lords, but it just kind of threw the flow off from the story, and the conclusion had a nice twist with it, but I had such high hopes for this book, having read and experienced the Knights of the Old Republic series, and it just kind of left me feeling flat. At number 112, we have Star Wars Dawn of the Jedi Into the Void. This is not a lot of people's favorite book, and I understand it. It's got some pacing issues, but I found it kind of cool going back to the beginning of the Jedi and having to work with a system and technology that you're not going to be able to instantly jump from one side of the galaxy to the other. It had some interesting characters. There's some real cool stuff that would kind of shade into what we would refer to as Sith alchemy going on in this book. So I liked it quite a bit. I haven't reread it very often, but it's one that I would like to get back into my rotation. After this, we move on to the not the Dawn of the Jedi. We move on to Star Wars, The Dark Nest 2, The Unseen Queen. This is Troy Denning's second book in the Dark Nest trilogy. And in this one, we pick up with Leia having established herself more with her Jedi training. We've got turmoil in the unknown regions between the Killiks and the Chiss. And it just suffers from what I consider to be classic middle book syndrome. It's trying to bridge everything from the first book to the concluding part of the trilogy. It's not bad. There were things that I enjoyed about it, but there were some other things that developed in this that I didn't particularly care for the payoff later on. Now we move on to the Fate of the Jedi series, which I rank sequentially from 110 to 102, starting with Apocalypse, which it just seemed like there was a lot of gore for no reason. I think Troy Denning was trying to recapture the highlights that made Star by Star such a great novel, something that I'll be talking about later on in this video. But it just didn't really jive with me. It left very little resolution for what was going on with the main threat to the series, Abeloth, and the Lost Tribe of the Sith. So it doesn't rank on my list too terribly high. After that, we've got Ascension, which I think is probably Christie Golden's strongest book in the Legends universe. It builds up a lot of interesting plot points driving towards the finale. I like the interactions between Ben and Vestara as they are trying to navigate a budding romance between a Jedi and a Sith. But again, the payoff of the whole series really draws it down. After this, we've got Conviction. And Conviction was a courtroom drama that is following up on the events of Revelation with Tahiri. I think that Tahiri was done dirty after the New Jedi Order. She was in a pretty solid place at the conclusion of that series, and then it's like the authors decided to just completely trash her character development over the latter half of the New Jedi Order and start fresh with her as this kind of, well, I mean, it does make sense that she's traumatized by the events of the New Jedi Order and what things that happened to her. But it just felt like all the hard-earned character growth that she had developed had just been thrown to the waste bin. The trial plot line did not play as well as the trial plot line in another Star Wars book that I'm going to get to later called X-Wing Krytos Trap, the Krytos Trap. The courtroom drama just didn't flow very well, so I ranked that one kind of low. Followed by Conviction. Sorry, that is Conviction. 1, 2, 3. Followed by Vortex, right here. And this one is an interesting story. It's picking up from the end of the preceding story, Allies, but it's got some really, really jarring character moments between the Jedi Order and the person that Luke has decided to run the Order in his absence and exile, Kenneth Hamner, and Saba, who I thought was a great character throughout the New Jedi Order. One, two, three. And Saba, who I thought was a great character throughout the New Jedi Order. She just, I don't know, she becomes very hidebound. She becomes almost more like a prequel era Jedi than one of the wild knights, one of those Jedi that was trained outside the Order, which I thought was a cool part of her background. So Vortex let me down. Preceding that is Fate of the Jedi Allies. And Allies was pretty cool because we got to see Luke teaming up with the Lost Tribe of the Sith to take on Abeloth. This is before the recurring instances of taking on Abeloth become pretty old hat through the back half of the Fate of the Jedi series, which I think was detrimental to her character and the threat that she posed. But this one was still pretty good with her being a legitimate threat and something that would definitely bring Luke Skywalker and the Sith in line to take on. There's also a subplot in this one, I believe it's in this one, dealing with slavery on Tatooine. And that's something that doesn't get brought up a lot in Star Wars, even though slavery is a part of the Star Wars universe. And seeing the Jedi finally pick up on that and address it felt much needed by this point in the timeline. Star Wars Fate of the Jedi Backlash was fun. This was an Allston book, and Aaron Allston has a soft spot in my heart. He writes very funny stuff. I thought the situation going on Dathomir with Ben and Luke was a lot of fun. And that's about as much as I can remember of this story. But I like that part enough to rank it as an okay. Star Wars Fate of the Jedi Abyss was very, very promising. I like the idea of going into the Kessel to the Maw and discovering a location that was connected to the Elders, the three characters from the Mortis arc in Star Wars The Clone Wars. It was interesting to see Luke walk in shadow and go and visit with Jason Solo after his demise. This was an intriguing book that set a lot of promise for the series that I feel like was not paid off very well. Omen. Earlier I said Ascension was probably my favorite of the Christie Golden books in the Fate of the Jedi series. But this one was good. It was fast-paced. We got to meet Vestara. We got some insight into the Lost Tribe of the Sith. We get to see Alana Solo adopt her pet, which is a Nexu, which I thought was kind of cute and kind of interesting. And we get to see Han and Leia really excel at being grandparents. The best book of the Fate of the Jedi series, though, was the introduction with Outcast. The idea that there are Jedi that are going mad, that were left in the Maw during the war against Yuuzhan Vong in the New Jedi Order was intriguing. We've got Luke accepting blame for all these things that have happened with his Jedi Order and accepting exile from the Galactic Alliance. Dala is the leader of the Galactic Alliance, which I know that didn't set well with some readers and it kind of left me confused as well. But this one was cool, and it starts Luke and Ben on their road trip adventure to visit locations that Jason visited prior to the events of Legacy of the Force. And that is a plot that I felt was a lot of fun going through the early books of the Fate of the Jedi that got dropped around the time of Allies, and I think the series was lesser for it from that point on. Moving on from the okay books, the ones that I don't read very often, to the ones that I consider to be good, which find their way into my reading rotation more frequently. We have Star Wars Scoundrels. Star Wars Scoundrels. And in that story, Han Solo and Lando team up to pull off an Ocean's 11 type story. It's a lot of fun. We get some interesting twists and turns from Timothy Zahn, who always does a good job when he's writing a novel for the expanded universe or in the new canon. And it was just a lot of fun. It was a lot of fun. There's some allusions back to Han Solo and Indiana Jones that were nice, and just the whole plotting of the theft that they were going through was interesting and entertaining to read. We also got to see some characters from other books in the Star Wars Legends era, such as Kel Tainer, who is famous for being one of the protagonists of Aaron Allston's Wraith Squadron trilogy in the X-Wing series. So it was fun to see him in his early days as well. Following up with that, we've got Star Wars The New Jedi Order, Agents of Chaos 2, Jedi Eclipse. This book, I think, is probably the weakest of the New Jedi Order books. The plot line of Han dealing with his grief after the loss of Chewbacca, 25-year-old spoiler there. But his dealing with the loss, I think this was done a lot better in the first book of the duology, Hero's Trial, which I'll get to later on down the line. The subplot of a Jedi infiltrating the Yuzong Vong and a war coordinator was cool, but it just did not hit as hard and fast as what other books in the Jedi Order series did. So this one is probably my lowest ranked of the New Jedi Order series, a series that I hold in very high regard. Having said that, the next book on my list is going to be Star Wars The New Jedi Order Force Heretic 3 Reunion. This is where Luke, Jason, and Mara finally get to Zanama Sikat, which is what they were setting out to discover to find a different solution to ending the war. It's a good book. I had fun with it, but it's not what I consider the top tier of the Star Wars timeline. It's followed on my list at number 1. It's followed on my list by number 97, Force Heretic 2, Refugee. This one I like better than Reunion. It deals with potential Yuzon Vong infiltration into Bakura, which is a planet from a book earlier in the timeline. It's fun to see those things going on. Tahiri goes on an excellent journey throughout this trilogy, and this one is kind of a turning point for her development as a character. So this one I rank higher than Reunion, but not as high as my number 96 book, Star Wars Force Heretic 1, Remnant. This book of the Force Heretic series I feel is the strongest. I like the battle between the Imperial Remnant and the Yuzong Vong. I enjoyed seeing Tahiri struggling with mental health and trying to unify her personality after suffering a traumatic loss earlier on in the series. I thought that this was the strongest of all the stories, even though all three of them are essential to the New Jedi Order. This one I feel was probably the best. At number 95, we have Star Wars The Joiner King, Darkness 1. This is set 5 years after the end of the New Jedi Order, and I was really excited to read this book because they were promising more of Jason Solo, and I liked the way he was used in this book. He was kind of a mystic, he was a little bit set off from everybody else, but he was still an identifiable character from the New Jedi Order that I really enjoyed. And he was brought back into the story because of things that were going on with his family. I liked pretty much all the character developments in here. What happened with Alima Rar that was set up in Star by Star gets a payoff here. And just overall, I like this book. Probably second best in the entire Darkness trilogy. At number 94, we have Star Wars, Luke Skywalker, and the Shadows of Mindor. First off, let me say, this is an awesome cover. Like, if they do a Legends, Essential Legends book, like, don't touch this cover. No notes. It's great. This book would have ranked a lot higher on my list if it wasn't for the POV chapters of the main antagonist. I thought that his motivations were goofy, and then when you learn more about that character in the larger Star Wars timeline and read his bio on places like Wikipedia, you find out that he's a real creep. So, not cool with the way that guy was used. He did not really land for me, but it was fun to see Luke Skywalker trying to just save everybody's lives throughout the system. Rogue Squadron's involved in it. We've got some great Han and Leia stuff, but really the villain was such a significant part of the story that it just drug it down for me, so that it only makes it to number 1. Oh, sorry. It only makes it to number 94 on my list. Following up on that, on number 93, we've got Star Wars Millennium Falcon. This is written by James Luceno. It's a fun kind of quest book where Han and Leia and their granddaughter are trying to discover the origins of the Millennium Falcon, and they're also running against the clock against a group that also needs the Falcon to find a hidden treasure. So it's a fun book. Again, I like seeing Han and Leia as grandparents. They seem like they'd be a lot of fun to hang out with, and you get some really touching moments between them. And also Luceno, he does fantastic work in the Star Wars timeline, whether that be Legends or canon. His work you can't really mess with. So this. The only reason it ranks lower is because it's following behind a series that I was just not overly pleased with, and led into another series that I thought was just kind of whatever. The next one on the list is going to be Star Wars Dark Journey, New Jedi Order. This book would rank a lot higher on my list if it wasn't for the ending. The ending is so abrupt. There's some great character work that's going on with Jaina as she's dealing with the trauma of two significant losses in her life following the events of Star by Star. I thought that was fantastic. I love the way that Kip Duran was used in this book. The whole subplot of all the scheming that was going on in Hapes was great, but the ending was just too rushed. I feel like this book should have been longer to have an appropriate conclusion. So it would have ranked way higher on my list if it wasn't for what I felt like was a very, very rushed ending. Star Wars Survivor Quest by Timothy Zahn. This is kind of a companion piece to the Zahn novel Outbound Flight. You're supposed to read this one before you read Outbound Flight, or you're going to be spoiled for a few things. It's also kind of a companion piece to another book that's going to be coming up real soon called Star Wars Tatooine Ghosts, where you have the main focus on a power couple in the Star Wars galaxy, in this case, Luke and Mara. They're recently married, and they are setting off with the Chiss Ascendancy to recover the remains of Outbound Flight when they discover that it may not be as derelict and dead as what they thought it was. I like this book. It's got some really cool parts, but it seems like most of it takes place in elevator shafts, and that there are points in it that really lag. I did like the twist with who the bad guys were in this, so don't sleep on it. It is a good read, but not as good as some of Zahn's other stuff. We've got Star Wars Tatooine Ghosts by Troy Denning. This is probably one of Troy Denning's better books in the Star Wars canon. Star Wars Legends canon. It deals with Han and Leia not long after they were married. kind of a parallel to what was going on in Survivor's Quest between Luke and Mara, as Leia heads back to Tatooine to bid on a painting that used to hang outside of her room called Killik Twilight, which has a secret rebel code in it that has identities for rebel spies and New Republic spies in it. She thought it had been destroyed during the destruction of Alderaan and A New Hope, but it was not. I like the fact that we get back to Tatooine. The parts where she's reading about Shmi Skywalker and what life was like for her after Anakin left, I thought were superb. The interactions between Han and Leia, I think, are really solid in this book. And we've got a nice little hint to what the future holds with Heir to the Empire, as we have a certain Imperial that's interested in getting their hands on Killik Twilight as well. So, this one, again, probably one of Troy Denning's strongest books. But this one, don't let it turn you off if you think it's just going to be some kind of a romance novel. It's not. There's plenty of adventure, plenty of good lore that's built into this. A lot of fun. The next one on the list is going to be number 87. And number 87 is Star Wars Choices of One, which is by Timothy Zahn. It deals with Mara Jade during her time as the Emperor's Hand. And honestly, it's kind of a retread of the preceding book in that duology, Star Wars Allegiance, which I find to be the better story overall. Although it does take a twist on the story. There were some points that I felt were rather dull, and I thought that it was a letdown after the preceding book, Star Wars Allegiance, which I thought had a stronger plot. Which brings me to Star Wars Allegiance at number 86. I like this book. We get to see Mara Jade operating in the Empire, but she's not using the dark side, and you kind of understand where she's at with that. She's being manipulated by the Emperor to use her powers. It was intriguing to see her try to crack down on these Moffs. You've got this rogue group of stormtroopers that call themselves the Empire's Fist, which Timothy Zahn has a thing for hands, the Hand of Thrawn, Emperor's Hand. But I like the Hand of the Fist. Each character stood out to me as an individual, and I liked the story of them trying to go out and do some real justice, what they felt like the Empire should be doing, righting wrongs, and still holding to their beliefs and not joining up with the rebellion at the end. So I like this one a lot. It's got some really good Leia stuff in here as she's trying to make an alliance with the governor of a planet that's an Imperial, who will be important later on in the series in the Hand of Thrawn duology. But fun action, intriguing story, Mara Jade, who I just adore as a character. So this one ranks as my number 86. Following on its heels, we've got Star Wars Dark Nest 3, The Swarm War. This was the strongest book out of the Dark Nest trilogy. It has the most action in it. It's got the most progression in it. And I like seeing Luke come to terms with the new direction that he's had the Jedi on. Jason, pretty strong character in this. We can really start to see where he's beginning to slide in toward darkness. But I thought this was a really fun book. The stuff with Alima Rar and Leia, their rivalry comes to a head. And you think it's over, but it's not. And I had fun with this one. It's my favorite of the Dark Nest trilogy. So that's why it ranks as number 85. Now we get into the Legacy of the Force books. Starting with number 83, Fury. Like I said, Aaron Allston, I have a soft spot for his writing. This one does have a rather ridiculous part of it where Jason feels like he's been betrayed with his cape, but it also includes one of the few action scenes in the entire Star Wars Legends timeline to actively use Kyle Katarn. So, give it some bonus points for that. This one, though, was starting to struggle with the fatigue of the series, where we had characters confronting Jason, but since it's not the end of the story yet, we can't have Jason meet a conclusive, definitive end. So, fun book. I mean, there's a doctor in here called Dr. Say-Ah. I mean, come on, Say-Ah. It's just got some good stuff in it. Some interesting pieces about Wedge Antilles and his family, and having to go up against Rogue Squadron, which was kind of tough. But yeah, I rank this one at number 83. At number 82, we have the concluding book of the Legacy of the Force series, Invincible. This book really drives home just how far Jason Solo has fallen. I think this is probably the book that did that best throughout the series. Starts off with one of his jokes from the Young Jedi Knights book, like every chapter, and that's just a sucker punch because he's just this idealistic kid that I've been growing up with, reading since I was in middle school, to this jaded, hateful man, and it hit kind of hard with that. My qualm with this one is it should have been longer. This is only 299 pages, I believe, and I think that there were so many plot points throughout the Legacy of the Force series that needed to be addressed, like what happens to Wedge and his family in the Galactic Civil War, what happens to the Mandalorians. It just all gets dropped, and it focuses more on Jaina and her very obsessive quest to try to bring Jason down. But I liked this one. I think it would have done much better had it been given the length of a novel like Star by Star, which I think is Troy Denning's best work in the Star Wars galaxy from the New Jedi Order. So it's good. It wraps up the series okay, but not as good as some of the other stuff in the Legacy of the Force series. Following that up, we've got Star Wars Legacy of the Force Inferno, also by Troy Denning. This book was intriguing because it picks up after the climactic events of Sacrifice and the loss of a significant character in Luke Skywalker's life. You start to see Luke kind of on the edge here. There's some understandable character choices that he makes towards the end of the book. We get to see Ben finally getting pulled out of his cousin's influence. So it's a good book. Devastating what happens to the Wookiees and to see where Jason Solo is headed. But that's Inferno. This is followed by, surprise, surprise, another book by Troy Denning in the Legacy of the Force series, Tempest. Of Denning's work in the Legacy of the Force, I think that this was the strongest one. They have a detective plot going on where Luke and Mara are trying to find out who the mysterious hidden man is that Luke's been having visions about since betrayal. You've got Hape's intrigue. You've got Jaina and Zek, which is a pairing that I always liked, but you're also bringing back Jagged Fell, who I liked even more than Zek as a romantic partner for Jaina. So this is his strongest work in the Legacy of the Force. At number 80, we have Star Wars Legacy of the Force Bloodlines. This is probably one of the better Boba Fett books out there. I definitely believe this is Karen Traviss' strongest work in the Legacy of the Force series. Not her strongest work overall, but in the Legacy of the Force series. We get to see Jason Solo really starting to slide into authoritarianism. We get the introduction of the GAG, the Galactic Alliance Secret Police, and it just demonstrates that the road to hell is paved with good intentions. This is one of the high points of the Legacy of the Force series, but it's not the highest point of the Legacy of the Force series, in my humble opinion. So, there's that. Next, at number 79, we have Star Wars Legacy of the Force Exile, another Aaron Allston book. With this particular novel, we get a lot of work with Ben Solo. We get to see him on his own without the influence of Jason. We get to see Jason begin to spiral deeper into the dark side and break ties with his family. The ending of this one felt rather rushed, but again, Allston has a soft spot in my heart, so that's why that's my number 79. At number 78, we have Allston's final book in the X-Wing series, which is Star Wars X-Wing Mercy Kill. This is more of a race squadron book than anything, and it deals more with espionage and intrigue. I like the humor that he throws into the story. There are some very poignant moments in the story that tie back with characters from early on in the series that you form an emotional attachment to. So it had some payoff. I thought that it was probably the best of the books in the Fate of the Jedi portion of the timeline, but not as good as some of the other books preceding it from the Legacy of the Force timeline. At number 77, appropriately number 77, we have the first expanded universe book from the Star Wars galaxy, Star Wars Splinter of the Mind's Eye. This book was written by Alan Dean Foster, and it was kind of set up as a low-budget sequel to Star Wars if it had not been financially successful. George Lucas could have made this. So it takes place on a swamp planet that's very foggy. You wouldn't have to use a lot of special effects. It's got Darth Vader in it very limitedly, but significantly. Got some good Luke moments. It clearly shows that Lucas was not 100% on the sibling twist between Luke and Leia at this point, because Luke is openly pining for Princess Leia. There's some fun action, interesting characters, and it's just kind of a neat time capsule to see where Star Wars was originally heading. At numbers 76, 75, 74, 73, 72, we've got the Coruscant Nights trilogy, and we're going to start off with The Last Jedi, not the movie, but the novel. And The Last Jedi novel deals with Jax Pavin, who is the son of a character from an earlier work in the timeline, Star Wars Darth Maul Shadowhunter. And he's a Jedi struggling with his war against the Empire. It's a good book. I enjoyed it quite a bit. Had fun with it. The whole series overall, Patterns of the Force, Streets of Shadow, and Jedi Twilight were a lot of fun. It's got this mystery, neo-noir kind of feel to it. Coruscant becomes a character. These are great books to read if you're looking for that element of mystery in Star Wars. So don't sleep on these. I don't know if they're very popular among the fandom, but I liked them quite a bit. At number 72 and 71, we've got a Star Wars Clone Wars MedStar duology, Battle Surgeons, and Jedi Healer. These feature Barriss Offee, but the real treat of these books is seeing the doctors in the MASH style hospitals that they call RIMSUs. There's a spy plot, which I wasn't super engaged with in the story, but the characters themselves were enough to propel these to make them generally a pretty good read. At number 70, we have Star Wars Outbound Flight. This is a prequel to the original Thrawn trilogy, and lets us know how Joruus C'baoth and the other Jedi wound up perishing on the Outbound Flight mission to the unknown regions. This is our first canonical introduction to Thrawn, and we also get our first canonical introduction to George Cardass, who is kind of a stand-in for George Lucas. It's got some interesting things going on in this story. It's got some moments with Anakin and Obi-Wan in the early part, which I really enjoyed, but you knew that they were going to have to drop out of the story because they weren't going to be able to go on the mission with the outbound flight. To see the machinations of Palpatine to make sure that it did not go and spread the Jedi legacy further out into the galaxy was pretty interesting. But overall, pretty good book. After that, we've got number 69, Rogue Planet. Now, this might not rank high on a lot of people's lists, but for me, I feel like it's a pretty solid read. The story of Zanama Seacott and its ties to the new Jedi Order begin here. It's an Obi-Wan and Anakin story following Episode 1, which this was our first taste of post-Episode 1 content, and I enjoyed it. I remember getting this shortly after the Episode 1 came out, reading it, really liking it, seeing Anakin, but it's got one flaw, as many prequel stories involving Anakin at this time did, that Anakin is made to be evil at some point in the story, which that just seems like too much foreshadowing. I wish they would have done the Clone Wars route, which they eventually took, where we see Anakin as just nothing but a hero for a lot of it, before we get into some really heavy foreshadowing. So that is number 69. Number 68, 67, and 66 are the novelizations of the original Star Wars trilogy. The first of these books, though credited to George Lucas, was actually written by Alan Dean Foster. It's interesting to see the changes that went on between the script and the final product, but still a pretty good read, and you can understand why people back in 1977 and into the early 80s were really interested in getting their hands on this, because they didn't have anything like VHS or Betamax to go back and rewatch the film. The Empire Strikes Back is by Donald F. Glut. Again, it's got some changes to the storyline that we see in the actual film, but pretty much follows along. And then we've got Return of the Jedi by James Caan, which I think is the strongest of the three and gives us a lot of insight into Vader's character, which was nice coming out in 83 side by side with the movie. So this was pretty good. Even though you've seen them all a million times, don't just discard the novelizations. They're a lot of fun. Speaking of novelizations, we've got Star Wars Episode 1, The Phantom Menace by Terry Brooks. Adds a lot of detail into Anakin's life leading up to the events of the film, which I quite enjoyed. There are some changed and extended scenes that are pretty solid, and I read this book maybe 2, 3, 4 times before the VHS copy of The Phantom Menace was released for home video, so I have a soft spot for this book. Following on from there, we've got Darth Plagueis. And Darth Plagueis is another James Luceno novel that is set prior to and concurrent with the events that are going on during The Phantom Menace. Which, really, that's one of the things that kind of turns the book off for me, is the fact that it involves Plagueis being intertwined with the events of... There's Plagueis right there. Kind of intertwines Plagueis being involved with the events that are taking place during The Phantom Menace, which I thought by that point Sidious should probably be on his own. No, it's not a big deal for a lot of readers. It was a big deal for me, and that's why I can only rank this as good, which brings us to the conclusion of the good category. And now we begin the really good category. And I start that off with Star Wars Darksaber. This book is so much fun. I adore the Jedi action that goes on here. I like the cheesy callbacks to The Empire Strikes Back. It's just a ton of fun, and I know a lot of people don't care for Kevin J. Anderson's writing or this book, but for me, it's a really, really fun novel to read, and I would highly recommend it. After that, we've got Star Wars Razor's Edge. And Star Wars Razor's Edge is about Leia interacting with some survivors of Alderaan who became pirates and trying to get them out of the situation that they find themselves in. It's fun. It's exciting. I have just a little bit of a qualm with it. Every time I've read this book, someone I know has passed away. So it makes it one that I don't really go back to very often, but I really did enjoy it. So that is Razor's Edge, which is followed quite closely by Honor Among Thieves, which Honor Among Thieves is by James S.A. Corey, who is the pen name of the authors who wrote The Expanse. And I really like this book. It's a lot of fun. There's great POV with Han Solo, really getting into his head, see what he's thinking about. It's just a fun adventure, reminded me of the Han Solo Adventures by Brian Daley, and don't skip on it. It's a lot of fun. All right. Following up from there, we've got the best book in the Legacy of the Force series. The first, Betrayal. This book set up such an interesting premise for the Legacy of the Force series. I was all in after reading this book. Just trademark Allston humor, action, and pathos. I just really, really was all in with this book. I still enjoy this book quite a bit, but I was disappointed with the follow-through for the remainder of the series. But don't let that stop you from reading this book. This book is really good. Following up with that, we've got the Han Solo trilogy by A.C. Crispin, which consists of The Paradise Snare, The Hutt Gambit, and Rebel Dawn. The Paradise Snare is like Han's introduction to the wider underworld, even though he grew up and he's kind of an Oliver Twist type character. We get to see Thrak and Sal Solo for the first time canonically, which honestly I didn't give him enough praise in the Corellian trilogy. He's basically the evil doppelganger of Han Solo. He's Han with a beard, and that's just kind of cool. But this book's a lot of fun, deals with a cult, which you don't really see a lot of in Star Wars, so that was an interesting plot twist. The Hutt Gambit is chronicling Han's time on Nar Shaddaa, and of the three, I'd say this is probably one of the weaker ones, but still enjoyable overall. And then we get to Rebel Dawn, and Rebel Dawn just really hits well. This is where Han wins the Millennium Falcon from Lando. This is where we see Han betray Lando, so they have hard feelings going into The Empire Strikes Back. It intertwines with the Han Solo adventures, and this also gives us our taste of the stealing of the Death Star plans, which I know there are multiple different stories about how the Death Star plans were stolen during Legends continuity, but this one really hits home with that, and it walks us right into the cantina door moments before Han and Chewie meet with Ben and Luke. So, a lot of fun, really, really good novel. Make sure you read this trilogy. Following up from there, we have Star Wars The New Jedi Order, The Final Prophecy. This definitely highlights Tahiri, and it's almost like a postlude to, or a coda to the Edge of Conquest book series. That's not right either. But anyway, that duology earlier in the timeline followed Anakin Skywalker and had Tahiri a main character, but this one really lets her step forward. It sets the stage. This is the penultimate book in the New Jedi Order. Sets the stage for everything that happens in the Unifying Force. Good action, fun adventure, great twists. Just love it. Following up from there, we've got Star Wars The New Jedi Order, Destiny's Way. I don't know how a lot of people feel about this book, but I love it. The battle at the end, Epoch 9, was phenomenal. I love it. This makes Twin Sun Squadron, in my opinion, rank up there with Rogue and Wraith Squadrons as far as Star Wars is concerned. It's interesting to see Jaina playing her part as the trickster goddess and the advancements that the heroes have made in the fight against the Yuuzhan Vong. This takes them from the depths of Star by Star and starts them on the long road to victory. Just great book. I don't know what a lot of people think about it, and it's probably one of my favorite hardcovers of all time. Following that, we've got the Enemy Lines duology. We have Rebel Dream and Rebel Stand. Again, both by Allston. Of the two, I think that Rebel Dream is probably the stronger of the two books, picking up immediately after the evacuation from Coruscant in Star by Star. It showcases Wedge Antilles taking over control of the New Republic's military. Lots of fun stuff in here. We have a reintroduction to the race. Jagged Fell and Jaina, their relationship starts to deepen here. Lots of fun action. Just almost like another book in the X-Wing series. Rebel Stand is also a really good book, but this one doesn't rank as high in many fans' opinions because they have this character, Lord Nyax, who is this amped up dark side user that's on Coruscant. And some people felt that was kind of cheesy. He's got lightsabers coming out of everywhere. He's got them on his elbows. He's got them on his knees. He's got them on his feet. He's got them everywhere. But I thought he was a cool character. And this one is the conclusion to the Siege of Borlaus, which began in Rebel Dream. So we also see Han and Leia setting up a network that they called the Insiders, which didn't really go anywhere. But it was a cool concept. They were setting up a rebellion within the New Republic to do the things that the New Republic wouldn't in the fight against the Yuuzhan Vong. And here we go. Now we're at numbers 51 and 50. Number 51 is Edge of Victory Rebirth. That's the duology I couldn't remember the name of. Edge of Victory. Edge of Victory 2 Rebirth. This is significant for the birth of Ben Solo, and it's also where Mara Jade overcomes her illness that she was infected with by the Yuuzhan Vong. Not a lot happens other than that, but it's still an enjoyable read. I'd rank it as really good. Then we've got, next on the list, number 50, Agents of Chaos Heroes Trial. This really delves into Han Solo and his depression and emotional state after the loss of Chewbacca and Vector Prime. The story is fast-paced. It has lots of callbacks to the rest of the expanded universe Legends continuity. And I just really liked seeing Han battle back from the lowest point in his life to that point to try to reclaim who he had been. It's got an interesting plot that follows a Yuuzhan Vong priestess who's plotting to poison the Jedi. And this is really our first new Jedi Order introduction to Vergere. I don't know if I'm saying that right, but she is a pivotal character in Jacen Solo's story arc from the time of Star by Star up until the Legacy of the Force series. At number 49, we have Star Wars Dark Tide Onslaught. This book was great because it really dealt with Anakin's depression and emotional state following the events of Vector Prime. And it's kind of another one that you'd tack on to the X-Wing series. We get to see the development of Rogue Squadron into this new era of galactic conflict. The concluding battle was a lot of fun, not near as bombastic or, I don't know how else to put it, huge as what we would see later on in the series, but still a very, very good read and essential to the new Jedi Order. That is followed at number 48 with Star Wars Dark Tide to Ruin. This one edges out Dark Tide 1 because of the events that take place on the planet Ithor, or Ithor, I don't know how you pronounce that, but it's a very important conflict that takes place. It sets up a later plot point in the series, and we get to see Corran Horn really take center stage and lead a Jedi operation with the military. The conclusion was shocking to me at the time, and I just have gone back to read this series more than once and enjoyed it every single time I picked up these books. Oops, sorry. At number 47, we have Star Wars The New Jedi Order Vector Prime. This set the stage for the newest era of Star Wars continuity, following Timothy Zahn's Hand of Thrawn duology. There are major, major developments that take place in this book. We start to see the Solo children really maturing and coming into their own. We've got Lando, we've got Han, Leia, Luke, Mara, the whole gang's here. Chewbacca. If you know, you know. But this book really kicked off the New Jedi Order in appropriate fashion. It's almost a horror novel at certain points when we're talking about the research center on Belkadan. And we also get introduced to Danny Kui, who is a scientist that will have a major impact on the war effort later on in the series. If you're going to read the New Jedi Order, make sure you do not skip any books. I don't feel like there are any that you can skip, but this is a tremendous introduction to it. I know a lot of people didn't care for the Yuuzhan Vong. They thought it was too grim, dark, and edgy, but this book was a fine continuation of the story that was left off by Timothy Zahn in the Hand of Thrawn duology. At number 46, a book that I don't see get a lot of love, The Truce at Bakura. And this picks up immediately after the events of Return of the Jedi. We see Luke recovering from his encounter with Vader and the Emperor, and they go off to the planet of Bakura to help an Imperial governor defend his planet from an alien invasion force from the outside. Luke's introduced to another Force-sensitive character, and this kind of starts his drive towards the creation of his Jedi Academy and the new Jedi Order. There's a fantastic scene in here where Anakin's Force Ghost approaches Leia seeking forgiveness and redemption, and she doesn't give it to him. I thought that was pretty good. Just fun action. There's some funny things that take place in this book. I know a lot of people don't particularly care for it, but in my eyes, it's really, really good, and it is a fun pickup right after watching Star Wars Return of the Jedi. Another book that people don't really care for, that I don't understand why, is Star Wars Dark Lord, The Rise of Darth Vader. Again, James Luceno, who I feel is a top-tier Star Wars author, ties a bunch of pieces together from the Clone Wars multimedia project into this book. I know people were disappointed that Vader was not the central focus of this novel, but I think Vader works better when he is used sparingly, especially from his POV, and he goes from being this uncertain, insecure Sith apprentice to becoming a true Dark Lord and menacing threat by the end of this novel. And it's got some interesting, solid quotes in here. One of them being when he's confronting one of the last Jedi. I won't spoil it for you, but pick this book up. You can usually pick this up in a omnibus with Labyrinth of Evil, Revenge of the Sith, and this. And it makes an excellent trilogy about Anakin's fall from just before Revenge of the Sith through the events of the film to immediately following. So I enjoyed this book a lot. At number 44, we have Star Wars Yoda, Dark Rendezvous. This is so much fun because we get to see the Jedi Academy almost like Hogwarts. There's this Padawan, and her name is, I can't remember, Scout. They call her Scout. And Scout is kind of a marginal force ability, but she's determined to become a Jedi Knight. And there's a Padawan tournament where they have combat trials against one another to impress the masters. So much fun. Yoda is more like his Empire Strikes Back version than he has been since The Empire Strikes Back. And just a lot of fun with this novel. Gut-wrenching plot twists. But I really, really enjoyed this one. Another novel that a lot of people don't particularly care for comes in at number 43, Star Wars Jedi Trial Clone Wars novel. People were disappointed that Anakin wasn't the focus character of this, that there are two side characters that we get a lot of POV from in this story. I just enjoyed it. I've read a lot of historical memoirs and a lot of combat memoirs, and so much of that stuff kind of rang true to what I've read in other books from the real world. So I felt like this was a pretty solid book all around. I know some people didn't feel like it was the appropriate way to knight Anakin and set the stage for Revenge of the Sith, but I had a lot of fun with it. Speaking of the Clone Wars, the next book on my list is number 42, which is Star Wars The Clone Wars novelization by Karen Traviss. It cuts a lot of stuff out from the movie. Padme's plot is kind of completely divorced from this adaptation, but we really get some insight into who Anakin Skywalker is at this point. We get a great introduction to Captain Rex. We get Ahsoka, who feels a little bit more mature, a little bit more fleshed out, and it's, in my mind, the actual events of the Clone Wars movie, not the one that they created as a holodrama for kids to watch to celebrate the heroes of the story. This is one of my favorite Star Wars adaptations, and it is one of my favorite Karen Traviss books. Continuing on with adaptations, we've got Star Wars Episode 2, Attack of the Clones. I fondly remember getting this book on my birthday when it came out, same day. I devoured it when I read it, and I feel like it portrayed the romance between Anakin and Padme a little bit better than what we see in the film. I loved Obi-Wan's story. You get more in-depth into his investigation. It just really hit for me and kind of made me disappointed when I saw the movie. I still enjoyed the movie, but this was above that. We get to see more of Shmi Skywalker and the events leading up to her captivity, which fleshed out part of the story for me. And we get to see Padme's family on Naboo, which unfortunately got cut from the film as well. So this is a pretty solid adaptation. After that, we've got another Karen Traviss novel, Star Wars Republic Commando, Hard Contact. I didn't know what to expect going in with a video game tie-in book, but I was blown away by how good Hard Contact was. The dialogue, the mission prep, everything just seemed very realistic, set in a real world, and I was super impressed by this book. Really, really enjoyed it, and I've gone back to reread this one several times. After that, we've got the Lost Tribe of the Sith Collected Stories by John Jackson Miller. I'm not going to review each of those stories individually, but the Lost Tribe of the Sith short stories were fantastic. In my mind, they were vastly superior to what we got in Fate of the Jedi. And it was really cool to see the Sith trying to set up their own civilization. If I can find it here. Yeah. Lost Tribe of the Sith Collected Stories. It was really cool to see the Sith trying to set up their own civilization on this planet after becoming lost. The machinations of what was going on. It just had all sorts of different types of stories scattered throughout it. You had romance, you had political plotting, you had a story of adventure into a new world. And John Jackson Miller is just one of my top tier Star Wars authors. So those short stories are well worth the read, even if you choose not to read The Fate of the Jedi. Following up from there, we've got another Old Republic novel, which is Star Wars Deceived. There. And if you've seen the Old Republic cinematic of the Invasion of the Jedi Temple, also called Deceived, you get to see Darth Malgus taking on the Jedi, storming the temple, and launching an invasion of Coruscant by the Sith. This story fleshes that out and shows us the events and the aftermath of that particular event. Darth Malgus was a really interesting character, in my opinion. I know a lot of people didn't care for one of the protagonists. His name is Z-Man. I don't know, people didn't like that. But I thought it was a fun adventure. I thought it had some great depth to the Sith. His Darth Malgus' relationship with the Twi'lek from that trailer, I found really interesting and creepy and like heart-wrenching. But Deceived is super fun. Go watch the trailer, pick up the book, read it, enjoy it. Following that, we have the last book, which is ironically the first book in the Darth Bane trilogy, Darth Bane, Path of Destruction. This book introduces us to Darth Bane in his civilian life and goes all the way through his apprenticeship at the Korriban Academy. Really fun to see this. Darth Bane is a beast in this book. You got a lot of that great Sith plotting and things of that nature. I thought it was a good companion piece to the comic series Jedi vs. Sith, which, if anybody's interested in having a complete list and rundown of the Dark Horse era of comics, I also have those and have read them all. But this was a pretty great book. At number 36, we have Star Wars The New Jedi Order, Balance Point. At number 36, we have a book that I feel is very underrated within the New Jedi Order, and that is Balance Point. We get to see a lot of character development for Jason, although a lot of people felt like he was doing mostly navel-gazing at this time. We get some developments with Luke and Mara finding out that she's pregnant. Han and Leia finally reunite after he left during the events of the book's hero trial and Jedi Eclipse. We see Leia working with the refugee movement, which seems very appropriate for her character at this time. Just really good book, super important to the rest of the narrative of the New Jedi Order, even though at the time it was released, some people felt like it was a little flat. I think that this is an underrated book that needs to be read. Another underrated book, in my opinion, is Star Wars The Courtship of Princess Leia. It's goofy. It's got Han Solo and a gun that can make people do whatever he wants them to. Han Solo wins a planet in a game of sabacc to give to Leia to try to win her hand in marriage. There's a lot of goofy stuff in here, but I have a soft spot for this book. The stuff with Luke Skywalker was awesome, seeing him interact with the Witches of Dathomir. Much different than the Dathomir that we're familiar with from the Clone Wars 2008 series. And the mastery that Luke has in this book, pretty cool stuff. The Downfall of Zinj. If you read the Race Squadron trilogy in the X-Wing series, this is where we find out what happened to Warlord Zinj. And this one sets the stage for the events that take place in Tatooine Ghost and the original Thrawn trilogy. I debated where to put this particular book, number 34, Star Wars Darth Maul Shadowhunter. Now that I'm looking at it and thinking about the story, I should probably have ranked it much higher than this. But Darth Maul is the Terminator. And the side characters are interesting. And the story is just fast-paced. I love this book for just the sheer thrill of it. You should read this. Also, with the upcoming Star Wars series, Maul Shadow Lord, it would be a good appetizer while we're waiting for that series to drop on Disney+. Following this, we've got Shadow Games. And Shadow Games is unique because the main character is Dash Rendar, who we had not seen since Shadows of the Empire, and we get to see Dash, who has been long called a clone of Han Solo, interacting with Han Solo. Dash's co-pilot is a Nautolan, and he's kind of force sensitive, which was really neat, and there's a cool subplot about him dealing with a hunter, but it's basically the bodyguard in space, and I liked it. I don't know how many people would rank the next 3 books as really good, but I've always enjoyed them quite a bit, and they are so foundational to the lore and structure of the expanded universe, Legends continuity. They are, of course, the Jedi Academy trilogy, Jedi Search, Dark Apprentice, and Champions of the Force. I'm just going to speak about this trilogy as one solid block. A lot of people don't like the fact that you have a new super weapon, the Sun Crusher, that is more powerful and devastating than the Death Star, but we get to see the Spice Mines of Kessel, and they're really creepy and scary. We get to see the early days of Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy, and we get to see them grow and develop as Jedi in the 3rd book. What I really liked about this series was the fact that the Jedi Order didn't feel like the prequel era Jedi Order, where everybody was just kind of a cookie-cutter version of everybody else. This almost felt to me like the X-Men. Each of the characters had their own specialty with the Force. Some were warriors, some would manipulate weather, some could just be all-around powerful, like your Kip Duron. And then you've got a Jedi Archivist, which was a fun introduction to the series. We get to see the Solo children at their youngest, and they get to go on a fun little adventure in this series as well. But I don't know that these get quite the love that they deserve. I think they're really good, and that is the Jedi Academy trilogy. Another book that doesn't get enough love, I feel, is number 29, Star Wars The Cestus Deception. It's weird. There's bugs, but there's a really cool story about a clone trooper who is discovering his humanity, and there's some good action in here as well involving Obi-Wan Kenobi. And I'm a huge Obi-Wan fan, so this book ranks pretty highly for me. Following up with that, we've got the Hand of Thrawn duology, which it's hard to separate these two, but I rank them as number 28 and 27. And this closes out my really good category. If you're looking for an endpoint for Star Wars Expanded Universe, there's a couple of different places you could go. But if you're just concerned about an endpoint for the Bantam era and not interested in the new Jedi Order, these are the perfect capping of that story. We get to see Luke and Mara become a couple. There's a new threat that might or might not be Grand Admiral Thrawn. There's Baron Fell, there's Clones. It's just a great series, great storyline, and you can't really separate them because it's just one big story. So that is the Hand of Thrawn duology, Spectre of the Past, and Vision of the Future. Those round out my really good category. Now we go into my excellent category. And you might think, well, what's the difference between excellent and peak? I couldn't list all of these as peak Star Wars, so I decided to just come up with an excellent category as kind of a cheat. But these books are really, really good, and I say everybody should read them. I've got a couple in here that people are going to disagree with, no doubt about that. But I think that they bear a read through at least once if you're interested in Star Wars. First off, we have Star Wars, the Han Solo Adventures, Han Solo at Star's End, Han Solo's Revenge, and Han Solo The Lost Legacy. So much fun. These are pulpy books. It's Han Solo in the corporate sector, divorced from the rest of the Star Wars galaxy, but him and Chewie get into some great adventures, and I just love these stories. Pulpy, fun adventures. Buy it, read it, enjoy it, reread it, enjoy it, and repeat. So good. At number 25, we have New Jedi Order, Edge of Victory 1, Conquest. Each of the Solo children got their own kind of standalone novel in the New Jedi Order, and this is Anakin's. This takes place before the climactic events of Star by Star, and this is the book that cemented Anakin Solo as one of my favorite Star Wars characters of all time. Anakin, realizing there's a threat to Luke's Jedi Academy, defies orders and heads out there on his own to try to make sure that the students get away safely from the Peace Brigade and the Yuuzhan Vong. His best friend, Tahiri, gets captured, so he can't leave her behind. And there is just so much lore that is added to the Yuuzhan Vong. Anakin just steps up into his role as the hero of the series up to this point. Just really, really fantastic novel. I've read this one so many times just because it's that good. The plot is fast-paced. The action is great. The development of the characters, superb. At number 24, we have Star Wars I, Jedi. This one is hit or miss for a lot of people because it's written in the first person. It's about Corran Horn as he tries to find his wife who has gone missing and decides that the best course of action is to attend Luke Skywalker's Jedi Academy on Yavin 4. At the end of this book, it almost becomes like a Batman story where Corran Horn starts preying on pirates as a vigilante, masked vigilante. And it's a great adventure from page 1 to the end. I know a lot of people don't care for the first-person narrative. It didn't bother me at all. This also covers the events of the Jedi Academy trilogy, which I do know some people prefer this telling of those events over the events of the series itself. But it does get knocked because people feel like Corran Horn is too much of a Gary Stu, that he's the pet character of the author, and that he comes across as knowing more and being better than Luke Skywalker at being a Jedi, which I disagree with those criticisms. But that's where they're at for some folks. Oh, I wish I could rank these higher. I wish I could rank this higher. I wish there was more space. But Star Wars X-Wing, Iron Fist. These are the books that really start making this list difficult to try to place them on a ranking. Iron Fist is Aaron Allston's Empire Strikes Back of the Wraith Squadron trilogy. There are character developments and deaths because with Allston, unlike Stackpole, he doesn't necessarily make everybody protected by plot armor. So there can be people that just die at any time. It's got an interesting plot where you've got a former Imperial who begins trying to infiltrate the race and then becomes enamored with them. I'm rereading this right now, and it's just as good as I remember. Ranking just a little bit above it, in my opinion, is Star Wars X-Wing Solo Command, the conclusion of the Race Squadron trilogy by Aaron Allston. What I like about this one is it's got more of the military bent. Yes, there are some ridiculous things that happen, and it would be definitely court-martialable offenses if it was the real world, but this isn't the real world. This is Star Wars. And I thought the addition of Han Solo as one of the main characters was a lot of fun. Plot threads that started in Race Squadron are neatly tied by the end of this book. So, the Race Squadron trilogy, if you're kind of intimidated by reading the whole X-Wing series, I would almost recommend reading the Race Squadron trilogy over the Rogue Squadron quadrilogy, or whatever you call that, because they're just fun, fast-paced, quick adventures. One that's very popular among fans is Star Wars X-Wing, the Starfighters of Adamur. This is a funny book. A funny book. You'll find yourself laughing out loud several times in this. It's Wedge, Tekko, Jansen, and Hobby on a vacation, basically, to a planet that just adores starfighter pilots and worships them. It's just so funny. You can't miss out on this book. If you don't read any other X-Wing book, this is a standalone for the most part. Pick it up, read it, laugh. Just enjoy it. At number 20, I put Star Wars X-Wing Izard's Revenge. You don't have to have read the entire Star Wars X-Wing series to pick this up and read it. I would recommend that you read the original Thrawn trilogy, though, because it ties in with that pretty closely towards the conclusion of that trilogy and its aftermath. But this one's a lot of fun to read. Not a lot of background that you need in addition to it, but the more lore you know and the more you know the characters, the better the reading experience is going to be for you. Then we have X-Wing, the Krytos Trap. Earlier, when I was reviewing the book Conviction and the Fate of the Jedi series, I said that it wasn't the best, most compelling courtroom drama in Star Wars. This is that book. This book is the trial of Tekko Selshu, and it's kind of the main focus of it. There's less in the way of starfighter combat in this. It's more of a prison novel and a courtroom drama. But that's kind of the thing that I like about Michael Stackpole's writing in the X-Wing series. Each book has its own distinct category or flavor. This is the legal drama. The next one on the list at number 18, Star Wars X-Wing Wedge's Gamble. When I was a kid and I tried to read this book, I did not enjoy it very much. I just kept getting to a certain point in the story and stopping, which is unfortunate because literally within a couple pages of where I dropped off, the story kicks into high gear. This is an espionage novel set in the Star Wars universe with some great characters from Rogue Squadron. Wedge has got some awesome moments in this book. Corran Horn, the taking of Coruscant takes place in this book by the New Republic finally takes Coruscant in this book. So it's an essential read. The one that started it all for the X-Wing series, X-Wing Rogue Squadron. Rogue Squadron is the premier fighting squadron of the New Republic. And it's got some of the most fierce and dedicated starfighter pilots in the galaxy. This is our introduction to Corran Horn, former Corsac officer, as he transitions into the rebellion against the Empire. There's excellent fighter combat in here. I've always thought that Allston and Stackpole were top tier when it came to writing starfighter combat. It's easy to follow. I can very quickly picture things in my head. This is where it all began. This book is awesome. but outranking it just a little bit in my mind, is The Back to War. This is the war novel. Rogue Squadron is Top Gun in space. The Back to War is like the Battle of Britain. It's a long fight against Izard and her Imperial forces on Typhera, the planet that controls Bacta, and the rogues go rogue from the New Republic to take her down. Booster Tarek's introduced in this book. He's a great character that has a lot of history later on in the Star Wars timeline. But the action in here edges it just above Rogue Squadron in my opinion. Now this one's going to be controversial. I don't know that many people are going to agree with me on this particular book, but I've read it more than once. I find it engaging and interesting every single time that I read it. And that book is Scourge by Jeff Grubb. In this book, we've got a no-name Jedi Master, Mander Zuma, who is an archivist, and his Padawan dies on a mission, and he's determined to find out what happened. And it digs into the crime world of the Hutts. There's the corporate sector, which we haven't seen a lot of in Star Wars Legends outside of the Han Solo adventures and a couple of mentions in the New Jedi Order and other places. But it's a super fast-paced investigation, fun book. I know not a lot of people have read it. I know not a lot of people will agree with me on my placement of this book at number 15, but I enjoyed it so much, and I can't wait to reread it. Another book that is likely going to draw some criticism on this list at number 14 is Star Wars Knight Errant by John Jackson Miller. This is a companion piece to his Dark Horse comic series of the same name. It follows a lone Jedi Knight as she is stuck behind Sith lines 1,000 years before the events of the Phantom Menace. I love stories about Jedi on their own doing the right thing. This scratches that itch for me. Each of the Sith territories that Kara Holt winds up in is different and intriguing in its own way. So, again, I know people aren't going to agree with me on this one, but at number 14, I put Knight Errant. At number 13, these were really hard. I wanted to make sure that the peak were the top 10 Star Wars books. So it was really hard for me to lump these ones outside of the top 10. But at number 13, I have Star Wars Shatterpoint by Michael Stover. This is Apocalypse Now in Star Wars. You get so much information about Mace Windu as a character. We get into his head. This really makes the war against the Separatists into a personal and tragic experience. This demonstrates that war is hell, even in the Star Wars galaxy. No notes. Another one that I was really tempted to slide into my top 10, but I decided it was going to be edged out by some other ones. Number 12, Traitor. I read this book at the perfect time in my life. I was a teenager. There was some stuff going on in my life, and Jason's Dante's Inferno experience here really resonated with me. So this book holds a special place in my heart. It's a little bit more philosophy heavy than a lot of Star Wars books, and it's not going to be to everybody's taste, but this is just, it pained me, just below peak Star Wars. At number 11, again, it hurt not to include this in the top 10. Revenge of the Sith novelization. Of the original novelizations in the Legends continuity, this is the best novelization. The Battle of Coruscant, which is the introduction to Revenge of the Sith, is like the first 100 pages, and it's epic. They cut out the part about the Wookiees, but it's more Shakespearean and operatic. Anakin Skywalker's fall, like you really get into his head, see where he's at. It's just the best companion piece to Revenge of the Sith that I could possibly want. So even if you've seen this movie once, 100 times, read the novel, and you will experience the story like never before. Whew! Now we get to the top 10. It's taken us a while to get here, but now we're in the top 10. And at number 10, Star Wars Shadows of the Empire. Set between the events of The Empire Strikes Back and Return of the Jedi, this details how Luke, Leia, and Lando are trying to rescue Han Solo from the clutches of that vile gangster Jabba the Hutt. There's excellent Darth Vader POV in this. Shizor is a scummy, creepy dude, which is appropriate. The Emperor is manipulating things behind the scenes. Luke, you can see how he goes from being shaken and uncertain of himself at the end of The Empire Strikes Back to being the confident Jedi Knight that he is at the beginning of Return of the Jedi. This is what tie-in media fiction between films should look like. At number 9, Star Wars X-Wing Race Squadron. I know a lot of people are going to be disappointed in this and think that Rogue Squadron should have taken this spot, and I was kind of hemmed and hawed about this. But ultimately, I landed on the side of Race Squadron being in the top 10 because Allston gets characters. He gets drama, he gets suspense, he gets action. He hits all the high points in this. Race Squadron, they are the Mission Impossible Force. They are the Guardians of the Galaxy, whatever analogy you want to draw for them. They are such human characters, even the non-human ones. And the plot to take down Zinj and the espionage and the subterfuge that's going on in this book edges it over the Rogue Squadron books, in my opinion. Another one that I don't know how many people are going to agree with this, but I've reread it several times, and each time I reread it, I get something new out of it. Star Wars Cloak of Deception. When I first got this book, I was not blown away by it. I was a teenager and it dealt more with that trade dispute stuff, but as I got older and I started rereading it, just seeing the machinations of Palpatine manipulating the Trade Federation and the Jedi to get them in place for the events of the Phantom Menace became more and more intriguing. Qui-Gon's parts of this novel are excellent. I think that this should be required reading for anybody who is looking to watch the prequel trilogy. Whew, okay. Now we get to number 7, Star Wars Dark Force Rising. This is the lowest of the Thrawn trilogy, but it's still in the top 10. Excellent book. The reason I rank it lower than the other two is it's got that classic middle book syndrome where it's kind of tethering the introduction to the conclusion, and I felt like they didn't hit quite the same highs as the Heir to the Empire or The Last Command. So even with this one ranked at number 7, it's still a stellar peak Star Wars book. Star Wars The Last Command is at number 6. The Last Command is a fitting conclusion to the Thrawn trilogy. It is so artistically done. If you know, you know. But there is some stuff in here that people have taken shots at, like Luke. If you know, you know. But I found it a compelling read. I like to see the conclusion of Mara's redemption arc and Luke Skywalker's development in his ways as a Jedi and as a Jedi Master. So good. At number 5, we're getting to the top 5 now. At number 5, we have Star Wars Heir to the Empire. For many people, this is the beginning of the sequel trilogy. Grand Admiral Thrawn is introduced in this book. We've got Captain Pelion, who acts as his Watson to Thrawn's Sherlock. Han, Luke, and Leia are written just pitch perfect. We even get some of those side characters from the movies, like Wedge Antilles, that I'm sure a lot of people would just blink and miss him in the films, but he becomes a key component of the Star Wars universe in this book. This would be where I would recommend a lot of people start their reading of the Expanded Universe Legends continuity, because it's most closely related to the films, and it's just so good. At number 4, we have Star Wars: The New Jedi Order, The Unifying Force. I said before that there are certain points of exit for Star Wars. This is the exit that I would take in the New Jedi Order portion of the timeline. The Unifying Force is just epic. It ties everything together so well from the 19-book series that is the New Jedi Order. Just the way all the characters are written, the action is flawless. I couldn't ask for a better conclusion to that book series. I love the New Jedi Order dearly, and this was the perfect capstone to that series. At number 3, top 3 Star Wars books. Star Wars: The New Jedi Order, Star by Star. I cannot describe to you the impact this book had on me when I first read it. The big loss of this book was spoiled for me by a Star Wars Insider magazine article, but even knowing what was coming, the book was very compelling. I know people hate this. They're like, why did Luke send off the young Jedi Knights to be the strike team to go after the Voxen, which are a terrifying creature that is created for the remainder of the series. But this is Troy Dening's best work in Star Wars. It is the epic, shattering midway point of the New Jedi Order, where you wonder, will the heroes be able to pick up the pieces and pull out a victory? So good. This is one of those books that I wish that I could go back and reread again for the first time, because it's such a great experience. Number 2. For number 2, I selected the book Star Wars Kenobi. Kenobi, also by John Jackson Miller, is a Western. And I will admit, the first time that I read it, I was disappointed because Kenobi was not the POV character for a lot of it. It was his influence on the locals. But as I've reread it more and more, I just get drawn into that Western vibe that it has. I care about the characters of the Claim, and the parallels between Oren Galt and Emperor Palpatine and Anakin Skywalker are just really well laid out. So Kenobi, again, is one of my favorite characters, and I know it's going to sound like blasphemy, but I did enjoy the Obi-Wan Kenobi series on Disney Plus, because I think Obi-Wan Kenobi is perhaps the greatest Jedi of the series. Sorry, Luke. And my number 1 pick, the Star Wars book that I have gone back to and reread more than any other. This is my Star Wars comfort food. When I want to see heroes being heroes, when I want to have epic action, when I want to have a novel that builds up to the climax that will come in Revenge of the Sith, I have to pick up Star Wars Labyrinth of Evil. This book is the ultimate prelude to Revenge of the Sith in my mind. I love the Clone Wars Season 7, the final arc of that, but before that came out, this was Obi-Wan and Anakin, as we had always been told that they were, best friends, great warriors, compassionate heroes. It was the culmination of the Clone Wars multimedia project. It tied in a bunch of stuff from the Dark Horse comics, video games, and the novels. It's not a very long book. Only about 339 pages. But I remember picking this book up for the first time, just being enthralled with each turn of the page, and it got me so hyped up for Revenge of the Sith that, again, I just feel like this has to be my #1 Star Wars Legends novel. Not a lot of people are going to agree with me. There are going to be some folks out there that think this is a mediocre novel, that it's not very good. But like I said, when I want to see heroes being heroes, when I want solid action, when I want mystery and intrigue, this is the book that I turn to. So if you can snag this with Revenge of the Sith and Dark Lord in the Dark Lord trilogy, they have an omnibus. You can get that on Kindle on Amazon. This is not a sponsored video, by the way, but you can get that, and it's a perfect trilogy of Anakin's fall to the dark side. So that's my list. If you're interested in hearing my take on every single Dark Horse comic, ranking those, however you want to play it, I've read them all. I've played almost all the video games. I've read everything in canon that has come out so far. If you want to see any of those other things, please leave a like and a comment on this video. I know it's been long. Whew, we finally made it. But thanks for watching, and have a great day.